Mr. Birdie, members of the board, we do have two items for board discussion this evening. Our first item is our book study, and for this evening we will be discussing pages 38 through 74 of My Black Friend Says by Heather Fleming. At this time we will open it up for discussion with the following prompts. I read, I noticed, I wondered.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any member of the board like to start the discussion?
I thought, again, it was a very good book, very good read. She does a good job in using a lot of stories and analogies to make her points. One of the statements that struck me right away, and I thought it was really good, just want to point it out, it's on page 39, and it says, your greatest tool as you are building your knowledge and gaining skills as an ally will always be your ability to properly apologize when you make a mistake. And it's a very simple thing, but I think it's really important. You know, when you dive into this type of work, no one is perfect. I make mistakes, you know, as you work with people from all over, you know, the world, from different nationalities. It's easy to slip into a range where you say something that's not quite, you know, the best way to say it or the best thing to say. But you have to be able to apologize, you know, just accept that you're not perfect. Move on. Don't make it a bigger deal than it is. But I think that was an important tool that she mentioned there.
Yeah, I also highlighted that in my book as well. It's like right into the first page that we're reading the next series.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, really on that same page, since you brought it up, the very top of 39. Speaking up because you might mess up is an operation of white privilege. It puts your self-perception as a good person above the needs of people in oppressed groups to have informed allies. And that's, you know, that's a look in the mirror thing for sure. She's getting in your face and she's saying, this is a concern and you have to look at it a little differently. So this chapter for sure, this first chapter really challenged me to look at those things.
I also, on the apology piece, I made notes off to the side. It does have to be proper and meaningful. I mean, it can't just be, yeah, I'm sorry, and move like my 4-year-old kid. You know, it's got to be meaningful and sincere to know, like you said, what was said, how you said it, because terms and statements today are different than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So having that clear, open conversation about the apology, I think that's very important.
I also thought the apology discussion was very important, and even though this book is specifically dealing with racial injustice and understanding other cultures, I think it's important for everybody to know how to apologize properly. Maybe I'm just getting old or something, but I feel like people don't really apologize anymore, you know, whether it's your next door neighbor or it's a national politician. They just dig their heels in and go, no, I was right, and here's why. And, I feel like apologies are important. So I think there's a lot of interesting information. I also I did a lot of self-reflection in this, like Mr. Begley was saying, where, you know, if she talked about some specific instances where, excuse me, where she felt like she wasn't heard, you know, and then somebody else brought up the same thing and they were heard. And I had to kind of go back to the front of the book because I thought, well, that's happened to me too because I'm a woman. And then I'm like, wait a minute. We read about this earlier. And I had to really think about that. Like it's not necessarily the same. So that also sort of made me do a lot of self-reflection too. As far as the I wondered prompt, one of the things I wondered when I was reading this, because she had specifically mentioned like independently learning about and understanding cultural differences and to find good sources. And I kind of wondered, like, how do you know? How do you know if you have the best source for this information? I've dealt with a lot of young people over my years at work, you know, in the work that I do. And sometimes, and even I think with older people, they tend to go to sources that they think will give them the information they want to hear. And they don't seek information outside of that. And I always would challenge those kids like, okay, you read this, now find somebody who has another opinion. And then make your mind up. So I kind of wondered, what is a good way to know you have the right source?
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, in that same section when she was talking about, because she mentioned one particular person, I won't name the name, but in that section when she was talking about finding sources, I think it is sometimes necessary to get different voices or different, or look at it from different perspectives. And she mentions in that section that you should actually look at different voices, different viewpoints, simply because it's richer, you know. And how do you get good sources? You know, that's a good question. I mean, there's bodies of work out there. You know, I think it's a matter of being able to ask a question. You know, we're all able to talk to each other, relate to each other. You can always ask. You know, that's what we're here for. We're trying to learn from each other. There are things that, you know, I'm enriched by and learning and being exposed to, and so I would say just ask. Feel free to ask, and it is good to have to hear different perspectives. You know, just taking things from one source, that doesn't leave for the full exploration of the issues. And there's something you can learn from everybody, you know. So I thought that was good. And the fact that she pointed that out.
Yeah, to piggyback on the whole apology, I read generally there are three main parts of an apology: acknowledgement you did something wrong or hurt someone, an expression of remorse and acceptance of responsibility, and then an action step to make amends or change the behavior in the future. And it reminds me of what my father used to say is, I hear you're sorry, you're telling me you're sorry, but prove to me you're sorry by not doing it again. And so that kind of reminded me of that, and then how I've tried to tell my kids the same thing, and then I noticed my daughter Sunday said the same thing to her daughter, and and I think that helps build them for the future. Like, again, like, understand what it means to be truly sorry for what you've said or done, and to change your behavior. So I highlighted that in the book. I did read something else that that really stuck with me, and the work that our diversity and equity leadership teams are doing here. And it talks about learn and understand the difference between diversity and inclusion. And diversity, I read, diversity applauds the difference among people, while inclusion asks whether people of diverse backgrounds are accepted and respected. And I think that's something that our equity leadership teams are doing here at these schools. I think they're doing a great job of it. And I read that, and I'm like, oh, our schools are working on that already. But as a person, I need to make sure that I'm doing that.
I picked up on that point as well, and he even, or she even talked about it, diversity recruits, inclusion retains, and I know it's one of the pillars of the equity leadership team, and something we continue to work toward, and so the intentionality of focusing on that, I think is really important. Diversity recruits, but inclusion retains.
Yeah, I dog-eared that whole section.
Yeah.
I thought it was good. Diversity is the starting point, inclusion is the end goal. Yeah. And you're right, I thought about our equity work too. I thought that that was very good.
Anybody else want to add? Billy, Nancy, feel free to chime in.
I had a lot of the same things highlighted, especially the best apology is changed behavior, and I think that you can use that in all aspects of your life, definitely. Great teachable moment for teenagers, I think, right now. So, yeah.
I have, I try to pick 3 things. I had about 8 Post-it notes, and I highlighted almost everything, but on page 38, that's one of my 3. I just, right off the bat, talks about you really want to make a connection. You know there are topics you could and probably should examine with an individual, but you're concerned about offending them and losing the possibility to learn from and develop a relationship with them. You cycle through a number of things you could say, but you're concerned that you may say it all wrong, so instead you stay quiet and you miss your moment to become a true ally. And that really registered with me because I just know I've been in those situations. And then you have those regrets after the fact, like, oh, I missed it, and when will I get another chance? So that really registered with me. And then, let's see, another one was on page 51. People not impacted tend to ignore the fact that the problem has not been corrected or assume that someone else is working on it and therefore place little time, energy, or passion into pressuring those with the power to make change to do so immediately. I've seen this 1 million times. People assuming that someone else is going to address something. And then several people make that same assumption and it doesn't get addressed. Or no one takes a leadership position on it. And so what should happen doesn't happen. And so that really registered for me. And then lastly, I love this on page 55. We all have a purpose to fulfill while we are here on earth. Sometimes the goals you accomplish and the achievements you make are not just for you alone. If you believe in the idea of the social contract, then there is a debt to be paid for those who created a place for you and put structures in place to ensure your success. Part of the debt you owe is paid through your service to others. And that was just overwhelming to me. It's so true. It's not always about not just us or me, and it's not about right now. It's about all of us and everyone, our children, our grandchildren, the future. So I thought that was just really powerful.
Yeah, and I like the fact that she used the story of Queen Esther in building that whole narrative. And she does that quite a bit in the book, and I think that helps to bring it home. I like the fact that she went back and she referred to the whole Flint crises in order to just illustrate how a system can be in place and it can keep on going even after people leave that system and come in and out. And I thought that that was a very good way of looking at systems and systematic racism. It's not just, one individual. It can continue and it can persist. And so her analogy with the Flint crisis was really good. And she does that quite a bit. One of the sections that I thought was good, this is one of the takeaways that I thought was important. It says, and this is on page 57, it says, realize that while quite a bit of this work must be done individually, we also need to find allies who are willing to join with us. And together we will be more effective. You must speak out on an individual basis, but you also need to find ways to join with others to take concerted and intentional group action. And I thought that was excellent. I think that's what happens in our district all the time. You know, the equity work would not have been possible if it weren't for the entire team contributing and fostering change. And so one individual can have ideas and can have passion, but I think it takes the group to really implement and get that throughput. So I thought that was a good one.
Yeah, when I read that, Mrs. Shorter, I thought about, right, not individually yourself, bring your family along. It starts at home, right? I mean, tell your spouse and your kids about how you're feeling and what the right things to do. And that forms a small group, but at least it starts a group. And so I think that's important that our families do that and start, like you said, don't try to do it individually. Try to start with a group. And I also remember, I thought about that and I thought, you know, even if you're 30 years old or you're 15 years old or you're 60 years old, it's never too late to start forming these groups to try to make a difference.
Never too late.
Yeah, that's a great point. Glad you brought that up. Anybody else like to add? I like what Mr. Begley said the other day. We were discussing this about, he said this chapter, this portion of the book, really kind of beats you up a little bit because you start reading about the white privilege and things you took for granted in your life, and are you starting to make groups? You're doing some work individually, but are you inviting others? And it really starts saying that you talk the talk, or you ready to start walking the walk. And so I'm glad we had that conversation tonight about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anybody else like to add anything? I mean, it's all good stuff. I mean, I'm sure that you felt the way that many of us have been feeling. I know you all personally, and I think this is a great topic. And just like what Mrs. Shorter pointed out, that you can't do it individually. And I think us learning as a group how to be better people, better board members, better community members, and understanding diversity and moving that into inclusion is great work. So I applaud you and thank you for making the effort to do this. Anybody else like to add anything?
Just happy you picked this book.
Yes, this has been great.
You help me on that too. I have all kinds of helpers.
Great, well, thank you very much.
All right. Our next item for discussion, board policies, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, Mr. Birding, and board members. I just have one policy to discuss with you this evening. It's policy JEE, student attendance counting. It's missing and absent children. House Bill 166 has required for schools, if we don't hear from a parent within the first 2 hours of the day, then we have to contact them to find out where their child is if they're not at school, or contact them in some way within the first 120 minutes. And the change here is just very small and very technical. It's changing the term unexcused absence to absence without legitimate excuse. And that just aligns it with the language of the law. That's the only change I have in that policy. Any questions about that?
Yeah, just obviously not with the change, I understand that part, but just the practicality of making those phone calls on a daily basis. I mean, how labor intensive and difficult is that?
It is very, very difficult, especially when there's a large number of absences. We do have personnel who block out time to do that every day. It's the law, so we have to abide by it. But it is extensive time. But there's a reason for it. If a child is missing, the parent doesn't know they're not at school. They could be hurt, they could be abducted, they could be getting, into trouble. So it's really key and critical. It's a critical component of our schools every day.
Can any of that be done with electronic communications as far as like a robocall saying your student has not
There-
been at school, or?
Some of it can, but we just have to follow up to make sure that someone received the call. There has to be some, I mean, it may say, we haven't heard from the parent today, but please contact the school and let us
Okay.
know that you're aware of where your child is. There's a lot of different ways that the law allows us to use. We can use a text message, an email, an in-person visit, so it's not just calls.
Okay.
We typically use calls because we want to get a hold of someone and
Sure.
talk to them. But we can use a variety of means.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Martin.
And just a reminder to parents is to make sure that if your child is out, to know how important it is that you do call the school and contact us to let us know where the child is. Thank you.